Hey guys, it's Sarah here. So when you become a nurse practitioner, you have added responsibilities, and unfortunately no one teaches you this in school, and you don't want to find out the hard way. So I'm just going to be going over 10 points that you should think about in your daily practice and to help avoid in legal problems. So let's get started. So number one is when you're first forming your contract with the agency that you get hired with. So 3 stuff you should really watch out for is, first of all, a non-compete. A non-compete is basically them saying, which makes sense, that they don't want to hire you and then you take all the patients and open the same exact thing 2 doors next door to them. So that makes sense. But you want to make sure that it's not a crazy non-compete if you're going to have one. So first of all, you want to look at the geographic location, because usually they'll say like X amount of miles. Are they putting a 5-mile radius that you can't non-compete? Is it a 50-mile radius? Because a 50-mile radius basically means that you're going to have to travel like over 2 hours to do anything. So you want to figure out that. Second of all, if you are going to do by a mile radius, you want to make sure that it's that location that you're working at. Because say, for example, I work for a big chain of urgent cares, and then they have a non-compete saying 20 miles radius. Is it from the location that I'm working at? Because then they could just open up another location in 5 years from now, and then now I'm restricted even more because that location is even closer to my house. So you want to make sure that if you're going to be restricted from a non-compete, that it's not so far, meaning like just 5-mile radius, etc., and that you're only restricted on the place that you're working at, not like every single different location they're going to open in the future. Another thing to think about with a contract is that a lot of times they put in that you have to give like a 4-month notice to them to leave. Now, you may think right now like, oh, I don't really care, but to future employers, that may be a big turnoff, because if they're, let's just say, really short-staffed, they want to hire you, fine, they'll wait a month, they'll wait 2 months. So many employers don't want to hire someone for 4 months because you could back out in between, they could, anything could happen in between. And they want a coverage right now. And one more thing about employment contracts is they also want to make sure that they don't restrict you for after work activities. Like sometimes they'll say you can't have any side jobs, so you want to make sure about that also. Okay, now point number 2 that you should think about is scope of practice. So if you become a nurse practitioner, you could be a family nurse practitioner, you could be a women's health, a pediatric, etc. And a lot of times they'll hire you and they'll overlap you. So if you're a women's health nurse practitioner, even if your patients want to continue with you, you can't be prescribing stuff for COPD, etc. So you really have to know your boundaries. Also, a lot of times, acute care and family nurse practitioner. So you really have to know, because a lot of times hospital will employ a family nurse practitioner in the hospital, but at the same point, they could be crossing over some boundaries of acute care and family. So if you want to subspecialize and you want to go back, go ahead. But if you're not, you really want to know what your scope of practice is in your state and what you could do and what you can't. Point number 3 that you should be aware of is prescribing for friends. So a lot of people prescribe for friends, their neighbor needs antibiotics, their neighbor needs this, etc., their mother, their brother. First of all, it might come back to backfire you, because sometimes they could be your friend, and then when something goes wrong, or if it's their kid, then they may not be your friend anymore. So first of all, you really want to watch out who you're prescribing for. Second of all, you really want to check out if you could prescribe it, because you might have a collaborating physician and they may not let you, it might be out of your work. They're only collaborating you for your work where you're working, not afterwards. And third of all, you also want to never, ever, ever prescribe opioids, even if it's for a friend, even if they're out of it, etc. Because that's always, whenever you're prescribing narcotics, that's always going to be a red flag. Always could get yourself in real trouble. Point number 4 that I want to talk about is completing your charts. So you always want to complete your charts. I like to complete my charts within 24 hours, but I know that's not always necessarily realistic. You're gonna, chart 72 hours later. A lot of times you're gonna forget how they look. Stuff are gonna be distorted, and because you see a lot of patients in between then, and it might not always be true, and you don't want to get yourself in trouble. So just chart as soon as you could, and lock your charts. The 5th point is medical assistants. So medical assistants don't have licenses. They're not licensed like nurses, etc. So you have to find out who's responsible for the medical assistant. So, if you swap someone, what really could go wrong per se? That I could think of. I'm sure something could. But like stuff like giving injections, if someone gives it in the wrong place, that could really have nerve damage, etc. So you really want to find out who's responsible for them, for their license. Is it the place you're working at, or is it you? And you also want to make sure that they're not doing anything out of their scope of practice, especially if it's under you. For instance, like calling back abnormal results. I one time was shadowing in a place where I saw the medical assistants answering phones and giving advice over the phones. Like someone's like, oh, can I cut my metoprolol in half, and he's like, yeah. And that was under the doctor's license, who had no idea he was doing that. So you really have to be on top of your medical assistants and make clear guidelines of what they could do and what they can't do, and find out if it's really under your license or it's under their license. The 6th point that I want to point out for is renewing certification. So, you know, it's very hard because it's usually like years later, every 4 years, every 2 years, every whatever year, so you forget. And sometimes people just wait for something in the mail, and it's really not their responsibility. It's nice for them to send something in the mail, but if they don't, it's really your responsibility. So I know you don't have a a calendar for 5 years in advance, but it's really something that you have to be on top of. I have like a spreadsheet that I write all my expiration dates, etc. And then I keep looking at it every whatever amount of months, and so I know what's expired, because if I don't get it in the mail, at the end of the day, it's going to relapse. And then if I did something and I didn't have ACLS and I was performing, you know, in the hospital, working in the hospital, I didn't have my ACLS certification, then it's under me. So you really want to watch out for that. Okay, number 7 that I want to talk about is knowing billing information. Unfortunately, they do not teach us in nurse practitioner school. They really should, but they don't. And if you bill incorrectly, you overbill, etc., it's fraudulent, insurance fraud. So first of all, subscribe to my channel, because I plan on making a video on billing. But in general, I'd really tell you to take a billing class, a coding class or something. It's worth the money. You don't want to get an insurance fraud, and it's really like not something that you mean to do. The 8th point that I want to bring up is prescribing opioids for non-cancer patients. So for cancer patients, you know, if you work in oncology, no one's going to come after you like, why do you prescribe it? But for non-cancer patients that need opioids, you really need to follow the guidelines. In general, follow guidelines, because then you could always back up to say, I followed these guidelines. But especially if you're going to prescribe opioids for non-cancer patients, you really need to know the guidelines you're going to follow and follow them. So is it the CDC? Is it your state? Because or else you can't back yourself. And in general, if you don't need prescribed opioids, just stay away from that, unless you need it, unless like that's where you work and you work with cancer patients, etc. The number 9 that I wanted to say is malpractice. So the 2 different types of malpractices, claims and occurrence. You really want to make sure, well, first of all, you want to make sure if you're under your hospital or wherever you're working in malpractice insurance, and even if you have your own, is it a claims-based or is it occurrence? Because claims-based means that after you finish working for them, you may not be covered unless they purchase like tail, but that you would have to work out with them. I would suggest you do an occurrence-based. So even after you retired or after you leave the company, you're still covered, and you also want to make sure how much money you're covered for, etc. The last thing I want to talk about is HIPAA violation. So a lot of times people don't even realize, but it's a HIPAA violation to look in your kids' charts, your chart, your husband's chart, your boyfriend, etc. Even if you just want to know labs, it's really a HIPAA violation, and the only reason you can really look at someone's chart is if you're treating them for payment reasons, but otherwise you really cannot be looking through people's charts, even if it's your daughter. So basically just keep all these tips in the back of your mind and remember this and do more research into this. I'm not an attorney. I don't know everything legally. I'm just saying these tips that I lead by every day in my practice and hope it will help you. And a lot of these tips I got from this lawyer. She was a nurse practitioner and now she's a lawyer, and she specializes in nurse practitioner law. I'll link her channel below. I have no affiliation with her at all. I just really like hearing her advice. I didn't even watch all her videos. They're like, 10 minutes long each video, but they're very good advice. And I really suggest you check out her channel and watch her videos. Her name is, I'll post her name down here because I forgot at this minute, but check out her channel and watch her videos and contact your own lawyer. So thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe, like this video, and stay tuned for more. Bye.